Jerusalem's Gay Pride Parade takes a violent turn as 6 people are stabbed by an ultra-Orthodox assailant. 2 are seriously wounded at the event thousands are attending. The assailant, the same man who carried out a similar attack 10 years ago. The Turkish government versus the PKK. 5 people killed in new attacks on Turkish security forces as Turkey's main Kurdish party makes a plea not to call off the peace process. And a chance for new hope for answers in missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Investigators scramble to study plane wreckage found on a French island in the Indian Ocean, with Malaysia almost certain the debris is from a Boeing 777. Good evening and welcome to the news today. And we begin the show tonight in brief in Jerusalem, where the annual Gay Pride Parade has taken a violent turn this evening. An ultra-Orthodox Jewish assailant stabbed 6 people. 2 are wounded seriously. The wounded were evacuated to the Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center and Hadassah University Medical Center in Jerusalem. Thousands of people were taking part in the Pride Parade when the attack occurred. And the assailant is now known to be Ishai Schleiser, the same man who carried out a stabbing at a gay pride event exactly 10 years ago and who was just recently released from prison. We'll go live shortly there, but joining me now on set is head of the Israeli Likud Party's LGBT group, Amir Ohana. Amir, good evening. Not so good evening. Yeah. 10 years ago today, the assailant in this attack carried out a similar attack at a great gay pride event in Jerusalem. Just recently released. We have to just start with this. Who was this man? And this kind of coincidence, almost hard to believe.
It is hard to believe. I was there 10 years ago. I was there in 2005. I think it was maybe the first or one of the first parades in Jerusalem. And I got to the stabbed, to the wounded, just after they were wounded. And it was a horrific picture to see someone sitting on the road on a flag, on a pride flag, and bleeding on it. It was a horrific thing to see, and it is unbelievable that the same person who did that 10 years ago, the very same person, did it again right now.
At this point, allegedly, but that's what it looks to be. Before this event got underway, thousands of people attending. There certainly have been groups speaking out against it. The rightist group, Lehava, protesting the parade, releasing a statement ahead of the parade saying it would not allow the event to pass quietly. We know Jerusalem is a very complicated city for many reasons, both political and religious. How much power do groups like Lehava have? Are they sort of a splinter group, or they actually have quite a presence?
It only takes one who takes a knife and stabs people. But the incitement never stopped. We hear it every year before the parade. And some do just demonstrate, which is okay. But some also call motiumatu, which means, in the biblical term, this is abomination and they should die. And people hear this and people do. So we will definitely march again next year, and this time on a bigger march in Jerusalem, and I hope to be there as a Knesset member, because there is a good chance that I will be. And if I will be there as a Knesset member, I will not be alone. There will be many thousand marching with me in Jerusalem, because it is more important than the older and elder, bigger brother, the Tel Aviv Pride, because Jerusalem is the capital city of all Israelis.
In this point, I want to take you, because Tel Aviv, we just saw recently the Tel Aviv Gay Pride Parade. Tel Aviv is sort of the public relations feature of Israel. It's a very, very progressive city, very open, very strong and thriving LGBT community. As I mentioned, Jerusalem's a very different case, a very complex city, and an ultra-Orthodox, if we're talking about the Jewish population, a big ultra-Orthodox presence. How would you describe the life as a gay man, or, you know, LGBT in general in Jerusalem in 2015?
Well, I have many friends living in Jerusalem, and it is not as open and free as Tel Aviv, obviously. But life goes on. People do not see violence in the streets generally. But this is, of course, an extreme.
Violence, of course, has many flavors, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily have to be violence to be an atmosphere that's not welcoming for the LGBT community. Would you say Jerusalem is there yet, or it's still stuck
Jerusalem
decades
is a very religious city to three monotheist religions. It's Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, of course. So where there is a big religious population, obviously it would be less easy, less open towards LGBT community. But I never heard for the last years of violent incidents in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, as I was saying, is not only the capital of all Israelis. It is where the Knesset sits, our parliament. It is where the Supreme Court works, and where the government offices. So the three authorities of Israel. And of course, this is the place where it's most important to march for our freedom, for our rights.
I want to take you to the political side briefly in just a moment, but first, our correspondent Julian Balloul is in Jerusalem at the Gay Pride event, where he's been covering it all day. Julian, good evening. Tell me what you see from there.
Well, people are gathering now in the ring, in the Bell Park in Jerusalem, the Bell Park. Thousands of people are here. It was supposed to be a party, but now it's like a funeral event. It's like a political gathering event. People are very, very angry. Now, in front of me, politics are talking on the stage. I see a member of the parliament. I have seen Dov Khanin, and now I see Zeva Gelan from the Meretz party, the left-wing Meretz party, talking to the people. People are very shocked, and we are all waiting for, of course, to hear from the situation of the wounded people in the hospital.
Julian, we just mentioned the Lehava, for example, right-wing party that had been making threats about this parade. Was there that feeling throughout the day that there was a sort of tension, that there were right-wing groups protesting against, or all was well until it wasn't?
No, listen, the gay parade in Jerusalem is always, complicated, but it's been 10 years since the last attack, 10 years. So people, kind of forgot that. People kind of forgot that, and even if, it's very tense and there are a lot of policemen, the situation is still okay. People were like partying and there were music, but everything changed in 1 second. Everything changed, and we understood very quickly what was happening, because when you've seen people running, when I've seen blood on the floor, everybody understood in 1 second that there was an attack.
Julian Balloul in Jerusalem, thanks very much for this update. We'll go back to you a little bit later. Emil, just one more question. You are a member of the ruling Likud party. You are the head of the LGBT group there, and the same Likud party has made some deals with the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox do have a very strong presence in the Israeli government. How do you reconcile these two things, and is the government going towards how can really the government go in a more progressive way with that kind of government? Since
1984, which means last 31 years, since the Shas party participated in the general elections, they have participated in every government, left or right, Likud or not Likud, excluded two governments, which was 2003 and 2013, both when Likud was heading the government. So it's not a matter of Likud or not Likud. It's a matter of Israeli society in general. And of course, we will fight homophobia. I was just talking to the Prime Minister's office, and they will immediately work something out towards it. And I hope we can see more and more LGBT freedoms progressed in Israel.
An important point that it's not always just about the leadership, the blame game, it's about the society. Amir Ohana, thanks very much for being with me, and we'll continue to update on this throughout the evening. But for now, we move to the growing confrontation between Turkey and the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. After months of figuratively sitting on the fence in the coalition fight against the Islamic State, Turkey has over the last couple of weeks made a major shift, launching airstrikes on the Islamic State and the Kurdish militia. The PKK has claimed the fight against IS is in fact just a cover to attack the Kurds, and gone so far as to say Turkey has declared war. Violence today included the killing of 3 Turkish troops, which Ankara has blamed on the PKK. Correspondent Charles Biblizer has more.
Previously hesitant to join the US-led anti-Islamic State coalition, Turkey is now playing its part. whether its true aim, as many analysts contend, is less to combat the extremist jihadist group than to neutralize the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, Ankara now finds itself in Washington's corner. In fact, Turkey has a long history of fighting alongside the West. The country lost 731 troops during the Korean War, and since becoming a NATO member in 1952, the Turkish army has played a supporting role in conflicts in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan, amongst others. For its part, the U.S. has some 5,000 troops stationed at the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, a major hub for military operations throughout the region.
I want to thank him for all the work that we've done together, the cooperation in Afghanistan, the work that we most recently did in trying to provide freedom in Libya, and in addition, the NATO obligations that both of us carry out together.
For decades after modern Turkey's founding, the military perceived itself as the guardian of the secular Kemalist ideology. But as the country has become more religious under the stewardship of Tayyip Erdogan, Ankara finds itself increasingly straddling the East-West divide. Ties to Iran, for example, created tensions with the West prior to the recent nuclear agreement, with many accusing Erdogan of helping Tehran circumvent sanctions. Ankara's ongoing support of the Muslim Brotherhood has further complicated relations with the West, especially following the Sunni group's ouster from power in Egypt, a stalwart American ally. Turkey remains at odds with Europe due to the continued occupation of the northern part of Cyprus, an EU member, a standing Ankara once emphatically aspired to.
Those in Europe that try to give us advice on democracy whilst wagging their fingers should know they are no longer dealing with the old Turkey.
Despite these differences and many more, the West has a major interest in keeping Turkey in its sphere of influence. For starters, the Turkish military ranks as the second largest standing force in NATO after the U.S. Army, with an estimated strength of 500,000 personnel. In the ongoing fight against Islamic extremism, the Obama administration has hailed Ankara as a model for other Muslim countries. But Erdogan may have other ideas. During his tenure, democratic freedoms have come under fire, a reality difficult for the West to reconcile with. Islamists now control key positions in all public and private domains, including the media, judiciary, and police. Perhaps most significant, Erdogan has effectively neutered the military, which as the country's most powerful institution, in the past removed elected governments on 4 separate occasions. Overall, then, Turkey finds itself in transition, torn between tradition and modernity, secularism and religiosity, East and West. An old adage applies: one cannot have it both ways. And to a large degree, as Turkey goes, so too will the entire region.
And joining me now on set, our correspondents Charles Biblazer, good evening. And Mohammed Al-Qasim, good evening. Thanks very much for being with me. Charles, I'll start with you following off on this report. It's really interesting, as you mentioned, this divide between East and West, because on one hand, we see Turkey progressively going towards a sort of Islamization in terms of its government domestically, and then suddenly a new sort of cooperation with the United States against the Islamic State. Where is Turkey right now, between East and West?
Stuck in the middle with you. To a large degree.
Hopefully not as confused as I am.
To a large degree, Turkey is a country in transition. So for a very, very long time, you had the secularist state of Kemal Atatürk, which has been to a large degree broken down by Erdogan and his AK party over the course of the last 12 years in power. That being said, things may be slowing down a little bit now that Erdogan didn't receive the majority that he wanted and is going to be forced to form a coalition which could moderate his behavior to a degree. He does have someone to answer to, although by the palace he built as the new president, you wouldn't believe so. That being said, given the fact that they are now involved in the anti-IS coalition, obviously a lot of analysts believe that this is really Turkey's own interest. It's not necessarily a shared interest with the West, because they're actually going after the PKK as opposed to the Islamic State. This being said, Turkey has always viewed itself as spearheading the Sunni states in the region. And to a large degree at times, that has put it at odds with the West because it has its own interests. So for example, with Iran, this is a major conflict. And at times it finds itself on the opposite end of various civil wars that are taking place in the region.
Mohammed, on this note of the Islamic State and the PKK, why now to start suddenly cooperating with the United States against the Islamic State? I have to say, the PKK claims, the Kurdish rebel group claims in general, that it's all some sort of a cover for an attack on the PKK. Seem reasonable.
This is partially true. After losing the majority in parliament, Erdogan and his party are trying to establish a new government, which they haven't succeeded so far. So this is a way of discrediting the Kurdish popular vote, or the Kurdish voters who voted for another Kurdish group or party that won 70 seats in the parliament. And maybe there is a new elections coming up anytime soon. Turkey will not shed its secular skin off very easily. It's part of NATO. It's closer to the west than it is to the east. And I think Erdogan now finds himself in a bind, and he's trying to reestablish his relationship with the U.S. and the West.
And it seems like the United States is on board for that, as well as NATO.
You'll recall that Obama at one point did refer to Erdogan as someone he shared a special bond of trust with. There was somewhat of a breakdown in relation, primarily, I believe, due to the fact of Turkey's ongoing support for the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, even after it was deposed. As well, there's been a major crackdown on civil society within Turkey, including the protests that took place.
Freedom of the press,
freedom to protest, etc., etc. So it does put Erdogan at odds with Obama and with the West, and there has been a cooling down in relations. But I think, like you said, as Erdogan's power has been a little bit neutered within Turkey, he's going to look perhaps to strengthen those ties.
Interesting to see where this will be in 1 year. Things change rapidly here. Charles Bibelser, thanks very much for this. Mohammed, stay with me. We're going to talk about a few different coalitions, because this Turkey coalition we've been talking about is far from being the only one formed these days. Saudi Arabia's Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is headed to Egypt today, set to meet with the Egyptian president and a number of officials. The royal court statement described the aims very vaguely as discussing cooperation between the two countries. This statement is a standard statement, cooperation. That can mean economic, political, other kinds, but it's happening. Saudi Arabia and Egypt just after the Iran deal was signed. I'm willing to bet that is a major issue on the table.
It is a major issue on the table, and I think it's the other kind of visit that you just mentioned. Post-Iran agreement with the West, new alliances are being established and created in the Middle East. Unfortunately, it's being created based on sectarian lines. Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and Yemen, Iraq, Shiite majority countries are building their own.
A Sunni Shiite, Sunni Shiite coalitions.
Exactly. Saudi Arabia is leading the pack. They just, after 3 years of not having any relationship with Hamas, they've invited Khalid Mish'al, the head of the Hamas political arm, into to Saudi Arabia, to the capital, to meet with the king a couple of weeks ago. He's been invited again. Saudi Arabia is trying to bring Egypt and Turkey together again. Fighting in the media has cooled down of late between Turkey and Egypt. There is a major push now to create a Sunni alliance to basically build a wall between them and Iran.
In terms of that wall, what could that kind of Sunni alliance do practically? What might be its actions? Of course, we see Saudi Arabia involved in the conflict in Yemen. We see a whole range of players involved in Syria. What could such a Sunni alliance practically do?
Basically, they're trying to contain the new Iran. Everybody is basically from Europe is visiting Iran right now. They're going to Tehran one after another.
We saw business meetings.
It's the new Mecca for business leaders from Europe and the U.S. Saudi Arabia is trying to build this Sunni alliance to contain Iran's expansion or opening to the world. They're trying to maybe secretly even create an alliance with Israel. We've seen for the first time ever a public meeting between Israeli officials and Saudi officials. So we're coming to a new era here in the Middle East.
Mohammed Al-Qasim, thanks very much for this.
You're welcome.
And moving to the Taliban has confirmed today that former Taliban leader Mullah Omar is in fact dead. Taliban sources said his deputy, Mullah Akhtar Mansour, will replace him. The acknowledgement of Omar's death was made in a statement released by the Taliban spokesman and comes a day after the Afghan government announced the legendary leader had died in April of 2013. Pakistan has also since announced that peace talks between the insurgents and the Afghan government have been postponed. This week has been full of news and unrest in Jewish settlements in the West Bank. After Israel's Supreme Court upheld the destruction of 2 buildings in the Bet El settlement, clashes ensued, while the Israeli Prime Minister approved hundreds of new units in the same place. Diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, Eli Ochenberg, looks back at the history and the results of Israel's evacuating settlements.
Those images from the controversial Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip back in 2005, when around 8,600 settlers were evacuated from their homes, violently clashing with Israeli soldiers and using all means to fight and protest their evacuation, are engraved in the Israeli consciousness, and even now, 10 years later, still serve as an open wound. A wound that Israeli society seems to be not even close to healing. This week, similar scenes also entered the Israeli consciousness, both in the West Bank settlement of Bet El, where 2 buildings were ordered demolished, and in the ruins of the Sanur settlement near Jenin, where settlers who were evacuated from there 10 years ago as part of the withdrawal plan returned and refused to leave.
We are building once, we are building twice, until we succeed to settle in.
Don't be mad, because we'll be back. Even when you leave the army, we will be back here. And the replacement will have to deal with us.
Those harsh sights and words of young settlers once again violently confronting the Israeli security forces are similar not only to the Gaza withdrawal but also to the evacuation from the Yamit bloc in the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula in 1982 as part of the peace agreement with Egypt, and to events in 2006 when the 9 buildings in the settlement of Ammona in the southern West Bank were destroyed. That reminds Israelis more than ever before what the consequences of such evictions are and how quickly such a situation can escalate.
The public now realize that the disengagement was a mistake, even a crime, and the support now is much stronger.
In light of this traumatic reenactment and the attempts to rejuvenate the stalled peace process with the Palestinians, it's inevitable to wonder what will happen if and when not thousands but hundreds of thousands of people will have to be evacuated from the West Bank. Back in 2004, as discussions over the Gaza withdrawal began, fears in the Israeli security establishment that extreme right-wing members would try to reenact the failed attempt of the Jewish underground from 1984 to bomb the holy Muslim side of the Temple Mount were rising. But extreme actions are expected not only against the Palestinians, but also against the Israeli security forces. The heated violence on the ground, for which this week's events provided a teaser, is also likely to be an inherent part of any West Bank eviction, with fears that the situation will deteriorate to opponents using live ammunition against the IDF. On the social level, a fierce fraternal war is also very likely to happen and would give birth not only to a violent discourse, but potentially even real violence between opposing factions of the Israeli society. There's no doubt that to achieve peace, many compromises must be made. The question is, even if Jerusalem does reach groundbreaking understandings with Ramallah, what will be left of the Israeli society by the time such a large-scale operation and trauma, the evacuation of settlements, will be over?
And with me on set is Eli Ochenberg. Good evening, Eli.
Good evening, Eli.
There seems to be this disconnect in Israel. There is the plans, whether it's dismantling settlements, evacuating them, building new settlements, even a 2-state solution, and then the reality on the ground, the demographic reality more than anything. What would an evacuation, theoretically, of West Bank settlements look like today?
Well, we are indeed 10 years after the disengagement from Gaza, and besides, you know, the diplomatic reasons, the desire for greater Israel, et cetera, the reason for that being such an open wound is how the Israeli government treated, or more accurately mistreated those settlers. There was supposed to be a committee that will take care of those thousands of settlers that have been evacuated from their houses, to take care of the short-term, long-term housing, financial financial aid and, helping them adapt to their new lives, but it didn't happen. And a special inquiry committee that was established after the disengagement even deterred that was one of the most severe violations of human rights in Israel, the way the government handled those settlers after the evacuation. And as you said, if we're talking about a scenario in which the West Bank and it's
a whole other picture.
Exactly.
Because the number that were evacuated in Gaza, a different reality than what's going on in the West Bank.
Not several thousand, but several hundreds of thousands of people. And here again, if the country will decide to go forward with such a controversial move that will for sure raise many society, diplomatic, political issues, it simply must not do again what it did in the disengagement. And we are talking about a budget of approximately $60 billion. I'm talking only about the alternative housing and the compensation to the families, not considering the military expenses, the logistic expenses. So we were talking about really a large-scale operation that the government will have to check really thoroughly.
Very thoroughly, exactly. Think out thoroughly, which doesn't seem when you have situations like Bet El, what we just mentioned, and in the report where you have buildings destroyed and new buildings approved at the same time, doesn't seem a long-term plan is really in the works.
Exactly that, and it's not only that there's no long-term plan, there's not even a short-term plan. And again, we're talking about large-scale, not the Gaza Strip. It was such a critical event for the Israeli society, so it's really a whole different story. And another crucial change since the disengagement is the influence of this faction, of the settlers, of the right-wing people who lives in the settlements of the West Bank, and their political power at the moment is much stronger. So it will be, again, a whole different story and a whole different struggle.
Speaking of a whole different story, in brief, is it possible to say, from looking back to 2005, the Gaza disengagement, 10 years have passed, has Israeli society changed with that time in a way that will affect that kind of a move?
Well, we've seen in the Israeli society that both extreme factions are getting more extreme, both the left wing and the right wing.
And the middle is disappearing.
Absolutely. And more importantly, again, the influence of the settlers. Naftali Bennett, the head of the Jewish Home, currently the education minister, has an increasingly rising political power. And if we're looking at our current government, a very right-wing government, there's no way such a move will go forward. But history tells us that right-wing leaders are the one to commit such actions.
They have done them before. Ellie, I'll say goodbye for now. You'll be back with us for more on Israeli politics, not just this, all the other big issues. For now, thanks very much for this. And we're going out for a 2-minute break, and we'll be back for the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Jerusalem's Gay Pride Parade takes a violent turn as 6 people are stabbed by an ultra-Orthodox assailant. 2 are seriously wounded at the event. Thousands are attended. The assailant believed to be the same man who carried out a similar attack 10 years ago. The Turkish government versus the PKK. 5 people killed in new attacks on Turkish security forces as Turkey's main Kurdish party makes a plea not to call off the peace process. And a chance for new hope for answers in missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Investigators scramble to study plane wreckage found on a French island in the Indian Ocean, with Malaysia almost certain the debris is from a Boeing 777. Welcome back. We go now to Malaysia for the families of the 239 people who disappeared along with Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Debris found overnight is offering a small glimmer of hope for closure. But the news doesn't resolve the most pressing question about the doomed flight. How can an advanced aircraft simply disappear from view? Ayman Siksik looks at the history of similar incidents and how the rapid evolution of aviation safety has left the pilots at the wheel behind.
On March 8th last year, Malaysia Air Flight 370 was making its way from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on what was meant to be a commonplace 6-hour trip. 239 passengers and crew were aboard the craft, all of whom would go missing for over 500 days in what became one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. On Tuesday night, search teams who spent 15 months in a nearly hopeless pursuit of the plane that vanished from the skies finally found the first pieces of what used to be Flight MH370.
It's the first real evidence that there is a possibility that a part of the aircraft may have been found. It's too early to make that judgment, but clearly we are treating this as a major lead.
No clear judgment yet and no answers as to what happened to Flight MH370, but its disappearance from radars last year, the only such case involving a Boeing 777, has awakened uncertainty over the increasingly advanced protocols of aviation. Unexplained crashes are relatively rare, but when they occur, miscommunication seems to be one unifying factor. In March of 1977, two massive Boeing 747s from Pan Am and KLM were preparing to take off on the runway of the Tenerife airport in the Spanish Canary Islands. The KLM craft began speeding down the runway under heavy fog, but a series of misunderstandings with air mission controllers meant that the crew was unaware of the most crucial and deadly circumstance. The Pan Am flight was still on the same runway. The collision, a result of misinterpretation of commands on advanced radio systems, remains the worst in aviation history to this day. 583 people were killed. But even as late as 2009, mysterious plane crashes continued to perplex investigators. Air France Flight 447 crashed in the Atlantic Ocean on June 1st that year, killing 228 passengers en route from Brazil to Paris. The investigation, which began 2 years later when the black boxes were recovered, found that failures in airspeed measurements led to the disconnection of the modern aviator's most trusted companion, the autopilot, the control system designed to relieve pilots from manually operating the plane. Since its introduction in the 1930s, the autopilot has evolved into a monitoring system so advanced that it makes several aspects of human pilots obsolete. For the two pilots in charge of AF-447, this dependency meant disaster. Having lost the autopilot, the crew responded incorrectly, and the craft plummeted from the sky. But for the families of the victims, there is little consolation in these answers.
Is that they still have provided absolutely no proof or substantiation to their declaration. Just a few months ago, they were saying that they believed the flight was under the control of a hijacker. So how is it all of a sudden now an accident?
Questions around the fate of the Malaysia Air flight linger on. And though Tuesday's findings bring investigators one step closer to an explanation, full answers lie unattainable with the crew and passengers of MH370 at the bottom of the Indian Ocean.
And Ayman Siksek joins me now. Ayman, good evening.
Good evening, Noit.
I want to begin with the families because just seeing that statement we just heard, it reminds me of the days after, the months after, and the families, the treatment of them and the communication. And this was one of the top complaints, that the communication to families and the explanation of what happened, if even in the beginning, if their loved ones were dead or alive, was really problematic. And this offers some hope.
Well, very little hope, I would say, even very little consolation. The reports they received throughout this year or 15 months were extremely conflicting. As we just heard in the story, at first they said it was a hijacker. Later on, terrorism was also raised as a possibility. You remember later on that year, MH17 was shot down over Ukraine. Right. People started to speculate that this is what happened to MH370 as well. So a lot of added stress and drama to this tragedy already. And now, with the first remains possibly of this flight being found, even more questions are raising, and the hope of ever finding the bodies is still a big question.
And at this point, also, they're just simply investigating at this point. Likely, they say extremely likely that it is part of the Boeing 777, but no clear answers on that yet.
No clear answers on that yet. It is likely that it is an accident now that they found some parts of the plane. And I think what that shows us here is the conflict of progress, really. And as we've seen with the Air France Flight 447, the autopilot was shut down in this incident, which is supposed to make flights safer, ironically. But when pilots are not as advanced or not as smart, even in some way, as the computers running the plane, this is what happens.
Right. This was something that was brought up back in the Air France crash, where you have planes that, as you say, are so far advanced and the automation is so extreme that the pilots maybe aren't getting the proper training. Hopefully, in this case, actually something will be learned in the end after the debris is traced to actually improve aviation safety. Ayman Siksak, thanks very much for being with me.
Thank you,
we're going to go back to Jerusalem now for a moment, where Julian Baloul, our correspondent there, is standing by at the Gay Pride Parade. 6 people wounded in a stabbing attack. Julian, good evening again. What's the latest now from there?
Well, people are now gathering in the Bell Park in Jerusalem. It's a political event. It's a sad evening, of course. People are very angry. People are very sad. We've seen a member of the parliament, member of the Knesset from the opposition on the stage yelling at the government, saying that the government is responsible for this event. People are very angry also against the police. The police was accused that they didn't protect the gay community here in Jerusalem. But we have to remind that the mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, just said that there is a place for everybody in Jerusalem. Of course, he condemned the event, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, said it was a very, very bad event, and it was is of course condemning this event, and we will find the suspect, and he will be being punished.
Julia, can you describe for us again a bit about the atmosphere, the situation there, what the picture looked like, thousands of people at this Pride event after the stabbing?
Well, there were 5,000 people, and when the attack when the attack happened, the gay parade just started in the streets of Jerusalem. People were walking from the Independence Park to the Bell Park, and suddenly we've seen people running and screaming, and everybody understood in 1 second what just happened, of course, because something like that happened 10 years ago with the same suspect, the same guy who attacked the gay parade 10 years ago, did it again this day. So everybody, of course, understood in 1 second what was happening, even if they didn't know the name of the aggressor. Everybody understood what happened, and after that, no one knew if the gay parade will continue. Everybody just stopped for like 30 minutes. They stopped. They were yelling. They were of course in panic. They didn't know what to do. And then they just shut down the music, and they continued to walk to the park to gather there and for the speeches. And it was supposed to be a party. It was supposed to have a party there in the park, but it's just speeches for now. And of course a lot of pain.
Julian Baloul, thanks very much for this report this evening. And we go from a hate crime at a gay pride parade in Jerusalem to racial injustice in the United States. Yet another case, another fatal shooting, shining a spotlight on the racial injustice that's still very much a reality across the U.S. Yesterday, a white campus police officer was charged with murder for the fatal shooting of an unarmed black man in Cincinnati during a routine traffic stop. But where does the city, along with many others, go from here? Annie Schatzberg has the story.
On Thursday, Ray Tensing, a white University of Cincinnati police officer, pled not guilty to the shooting murder of Samuel DuBose, a 45-year-old black man. DuBose was pulled over by the police officer on July 19th, and the conversation started normally enough.
You have a license on you? I have a license. You can run my name.
But when DuBose failed to show his driver's license, the scene turned deadly. Tensing claimed he was dragged and almost run over by DuBose's Honda Accord. But the officer's body camera footage contradicts that story. It seems Tensing was not dragged, but rather fell backwards after shooting DuBose, who was struck in the head and died almost instantly. Hundreds of people gathered in Cincinnati Wednesday in support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
I feel good that he's being locked up because he had shot him blatantly murdered. He didn't do nothing but shoot him.
Tensing has been fired by university police and could be sentenced to life in prison if convicted.
I've been doing this for over 30 years. This is the most asinine act I've ever seen a police officer make. Totally unwarranted. It's an absolute tragedy in the year 2015 that anyone would behave in this manner.
The incident is the latest in a string of deaths of Black Americans at the hands of law enforcement in the past year. This month, Sandra Bland, a Black woman from Texas, was pulled over and arrested by police. She was found dead in her jail cell 3 days later. In April, Walter Scott, a Black man from South Carolina, was shot and killed by a white police officer following a traffic stop for a broken brake light, with the officer in this case being held accountable. Cincinnati now joins the growing list of American cities where police violence against minorities is coming under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny.
And ABC's Marcy Gonzalez is in New York. Marcy, good evening. What happened in court today in Cincinnati?
Well, it was a very short hearing. You can see Ray Tenzing standing there in prison stripes, such a contrast to the police uniform he used to wear. During this arraignment, he pleaded not guilty. The judge set bond at $1 million and announced that he'll have to be back in court again next month.
And Marcy, how is the family coping in this case?
Well, understandably, they're still very upset and emotional. This all just happened less than 2 weeks ago, but they say they're grateful and relieved that this officer was wearing that body camera. They say without that video, they don't believe he ever would have been charged. And now they say they are confident he will be convicted. If he is, he could face 15 years to life in prison.
Marcy Gonzalez in New York, thanks very much for that. And as the debate over racial injustice and police brutality in America continues with one case like this after another, a different debate over terror is underway. A case unfolding in Virginia and beginning today deals with a combatant captured on the battlefield being tried in civilian court instead of a military tribunal. Iraq Hamidullah is charged with leading a Taliban attack on U.S. forces in Afghanistan. It's the most recent example of the Obama administration's effort to use criminal courts to deal with terror suspects. And with me to explain a bit more about this decision, defense and government analyst for Haaretz, Amir Oren. Good evening, Amir.
Evening, Nurit.
What's behind this shift? Let's talk about the shift on the large scale, moving to charge terror suspects in civilian court.
The United States cannot find the right balance between law enforcement on the one hand and intelligence, including foiling attacks on the other hand. This is what happened between the CIA and the FBI in the lead up to 9/11, 14 years ago in a couple of weeks. And on the other hand, you have the problem of countries which are beholden to the Geneva Convention, including prisoners of war. This is regular between nations. This is simple. And organizations which carry out attacks outside the bounds of these conventions. So what happens when such an organization, including Taliban, when Taliban was toppled from power in Afghanistan some 14 years ago, when it becomes only a terror organization according to the definition of the US government, and you have a combatant captured, because the policy of the United States is to capture or kill. Now, if he resists arrest, when the FBI, which joins the armed forces in the manhunt, when the FBI tries to arrest him and he resists arrest, he is then shot and sometimes killed. This is simple. What happens when he is apprehended? Then he is being brought over to the United States, and as you mentioned, there was, for the last 7 years or so, there was a habit of having military commissions or tribunals trying those terror.
Where can that line be drawn? It's one of the many fine lines in terror and deciding who is an enemy combatant. How can the United States, where does it draw the line between the enemy combatant that should be tried in civilian court and perhaps still a military tribunal?
It cannot really be drawn. It was a political decision by the incoming administration, the Obama administration, in 2009, to do it, because one of his pledges during the election campaign was to close down Guantanamo and to try and get those cases to federal courts. But this is not a civilian case, and if it is a civilian case, then there are questions of extradition. How was he brought to the United States?
And so, a lot of precedents that are going to be set. A lot of precedents,
and then even when they are convicted, it is usually being thrown out of court when a higher court hears the appeal. So it will be very interesting to see whether this Russian soldier who became a convert to the Taliban proven cause will be convicted.
And exactly, in civilian court, a precedent can clearly be set. Amir Oren, thanks very much for this.
Thank you.
And to something terror-related but positive for a change. Last night we brought you the story of a camp outside of Paris bringing together young victims of terror from all corners of the globe with the goal of bringing about unexpected friendships to help them move forward. Tonight, Matthias Inbar and Uri Shapira take a closer look at the young adults taking part and their stories from Algeria to Israel.
There are friendships that nothing can break. For these young victims of terror, adversity, on the contrary, is what strengthens the links between them. A seminar organized by them in Paris by the French Association of Victims of Terrorism has allowed them to meet again 1 year after parting ways. Sephora is Israeli. She was injured by shelling fired from the Gaza Strip. Viviana is Colombian. Her father was executed by the FARC. Two very different stories you might not think would create such a bond.
It was a simple coincidence. I was very scared the first day I arrived. I introduced myself. Hello, my name is Sephora Abitbol. She looked at me and told me, well, I'm Viviana Abitbol. I thought she was joking, and we became friends right from the start.
A combination of circumstances for Sephora, a highlight for her little sister also wounded by a shell fired from the Gaza Strip. Her friend this time is Moroccan.
When we met, when we all sat together, we had to learn about each other, to talk to each other. I asked her for a hug, and we connected right away like that.
A link that wasn't tarnished by 2014's Operation Protective Edge in Gaza. Salima admits she never hides this friendship with her Moroccan friends, convinced of her utility of strengthening this link between two girls, both victims of terror.
They told me we have to meet. Avec elle.
It's so cute.
But before the barriers fall, they must learn to listen to each other, understanding that one story resembles that of the other. And thousands of kilometers apart, both girls agree to rebel against any form of complaisance vis-à-vis terrorism.
The project allowed us to recognize the evil in terrorism and to know that what happened to us is not our fault.
Moving to a little bit of economy, Dr. Alex Coman joins me, value creation expert at the Academic College of Tel Aviv. Dr. Coman, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's talk oil.
Okay.
Shell oil, first of all.
Oil, yes. Well, the thing is that oil prices are falling, which is what everybody dreamt except for OPEC countries.
Right.
And several things caused it to drop. One thing is Iran returning to the, becoming an exporter of oil again. Another thing is shale gas, which is gas which is stored within rocks, and the technology for releasing it is a relatively new technology. And the third thing is Saudi Arabia, really concerned about this shale gas and reducing the prices in order to help shut down shale gas projects. Because if oil prices are high, then various shale gas projects are profitable because they're cheaper. But if oil prices go down, then there's no economic logic in producing expensive gas, so you just shut them down, which enables you to raise the price of oil again. So these three elements caused the Eni, the Italian oil company, and ConocoPhillips to lose money. And Shell has cut 6,500 jobs, which is a dramatic shutdown in this industry.
We spoke earlier in this edition, as almost every day these days, about the Iran nuclear deal, and here it comes up again, as you mentioned. What does the deal mean now that we can see a couple of weeks after mean for oil going forward?
Well, historically, I mean, in recent times, economic sanctions were very effective, and they have been. There was massive pressure on Iran, which means that Iran could export oil, but relatively significantly smaller amounts than Iran was capable of exporting. Now that Iran can basically export as much oil as it wants, it can basically raise the level of living in Iran, and of course finance its political allies around the world, which is a massive concern.
And one last word about another Iranian ally, Russia, who has not been doing so well economically these days.
Well, yeah. Well, Russia is really a paradox, because when the Soviet Union broke down, I was sure that Russia was going to do fabulously well. But what happened is that, for some reason, the Russians are very happy with President Putin fighting in the Ukraine and paying the price of the ruble losing much of its value and sanctions on Russia. And as a result, Russia cannot export products. There's a boycott, European boycott on Russia, which is massive, pressurizing it massively. And the last straw was that Putin's money manager is is in France.
That's never good if your money manager flees the
Yes.
country. Dr. Alex Coleman, thanks very much for being with me.
Thank you.
Now back to politics, but arguably a bit of entertainment as well. Despite continuously controversial comments piling up, Donald Trump is gaining momentum ahead of next week's first GOP debate. Shachar Pele delved into the history of the Trump factor and the man with many roles, but just one hairstyle.
We know very little about our president. He's a war hero because he was captured. I guess I caused controversy, and for no reason.
A businessman, a media celebrity, a wannabe politician, and above all, a brand.
I'm actually a nice person.
Donald J. Trump has it all, but always seems to want more. Always controversial, he may be gradually reaching the limits of celebrity, but this doesn't seem to slow him down.
Well, I've always said, you know, money isn't a totally essential ingredient, but it does make life a little bit easier.
After graduating with a degree in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, Trump joined his father's real estate business and gained control in 1971, taking the Manhattan scene by storm. After almost filing for bankruptcy in 1990, largely due to debt over his Taj Mahal Atlantic City casino, he managed to bounce back and today owns more than 100 companies with a net worth of approximately $4 billion. With his own vodka brand, airline, hotel chain, and even a board game,
My new game is Trump, the game.
Trump has tried to leave his mark. Most notable was his NBC show, The Apprentice, in which he mastered the art of firing people.
You're fired.
Networks recently severed ties with Trump, including his world-famous beauty pageants, due to some notorious comments.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
After becoming famous for making money, getting divorced, arguing about his hairdo,
It's really mine, you know? It's like,
Finally, a candidate whose hair gets more attention than mine.
and becoming an easy target for many comedians,
I really feel like he's some sort of Jewish holiday waiting to happen.
Please welcome the second worst tragedy ever to hit New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald J. Trump.
politics became the next best step. In 2010, Trump expressed an interest in joining the 2012 presidential race, but never threw himself into the ring. These days, the world is bearing witness to his full-blown comeback.
Part of the beauty of me is that I'm very rich.
But the Trump Express is moving fast, its engine as noisy as ever. A new Reuters Ipsos opinion poll shows Trump leading the pack by his largest margin yet, and only 1 week before the inaugural GOP debate.
I think he's awesome.
Nearly a quarter of Republicans surveyed said he would be their choice as the party's presidential nominee in 2016, believing he possesses strong leadership qualities. And so, at least for the time being, the Trump phenomenon is here to stay.
Shachar, I have to say, watching your report, every time I saw a Donald Trump quote, I thought, this one we have to talk about. This is crazy. And then another one, and then another one. And now I've lost count, and I don't even know where to begin.
Actually, it's endless. I didn't know which ones to put into the report because it's really a huge amount piling up all the time. And in fact, already some Republicans have written the political obituary of Trump when he turned things around. And apparently people are wrong.
They keep doing that, and they keep being proven wrong.
Absolutely, especially following such notorious comments regarding Senator John McCain's military service, but the people apparently think otherwise. Trump has now opened up a double-digit lead over his closest rival, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who trails after his 24% only at 12% behind. And in fact, not only in the Reuters poll, but in another national Republican poll, Trump also leads with 20%. He's followed by Wisconsin Governor Governor Scott Walker, of course, with 13%, and Jeb Bush only in third place with 10%. So whoever thought he's like this flash in the moment was apparently wrong. He's here to stay in the meantime. What is he doing right? This is what we're trying to find out. He apparently has some kind of appeal, especially for those conservatives who think that the past candidates of the Republican Party have been too moderate in the past, speaking of Romney and McCain. Also, the Washington Post noted that a lot of his supporters, it has a lot to do with education. A Washington Post and ABC poll found that only 8% of Trump supporters have a college degree, any kind of college degree. And so they connect the reasons of low education to those people who have relatively negative views over immigration. These are concentrated among whites, Republicans, and with lower levels of education.
We're still talking about a guy who's boasting about his wealth every chance he gets, which you'd think might not jive as well with the average person.
It's so true, but still it's the day-to-day things that are actually influencing, and those who have to face the direct competition over jobs with immigrants are following his lead. And of course, he enjoys the name recognition in light of his celebrity. He is a big reality TV star. I'm pretty betting that if Kim Kardashian was now a part of the race, she would have gotten some double digits there.
It would be a good race between them, maybe.
Very interesting.
Shahapel, thanks very much for this. The debate certainly will be interesting. If Trump has never been in a presidential debate, a lot of boardrooms, but never debate.
We'll see him there. We have to wait till next week.
We'll see. I think everybody will enjoy it. We're going out for an update from our news desk when we'll be back from American politics to Israeli politics, the week in Israeli politics. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Welcome back to the news today. Thanks for staying with us. We're talking about Israeli politics, the week in Israeli politics. Some of that, of course, this evening has become not so positive, not a laughing matter with the Gay Pride Parade in Jerusalem. 6 people wounded in that parade, stabbed by an ultra-Orthodox Jew. With me in the studio to talk about this and a whole range of other issues, Professor of Political Science, Dr. Hani Zubaydah. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
And diplomatic correspondent for the news today, Eli Yochenberg.
Good evening.
Hani, first, a few words about the Pride Parade today. Could we have seen it coming? On one hand, this is the first time we saw this in 10 years, this kind of event at the Gay Pride, but Gay Pride in Jerusalem is not a simple event in a very complex city.
Yeah, well, nothing is simple in Israel, so is the Gay Parade.
Especially not in Jerusalem.
Yeah,
especially not in Jerusalem.
But regardless of that, the police should have seen it coming. This person, this exact same person, well, we just got through the wire a message that there might be another attacker, which the police does not want to convey to us yet, but there might be a second attacker. At this moment, as they say, this is the guy who stabbed people 10 years ago.
Who was just released
out of prison 31 days ago. People within the parade started texting each other that they saw him around the parade, and they went to the police and told them. Reporters that asked the police, did you know that he was there? Were replied, no, we did not. It seems like everything was too casual this time because 10 years of quiet, things just went down. But I should say, all the Israeli political system, excluding the ultra-Orthodox parties and few like Smotrich from the Jewish home, everybody is condemning the act. However, regardless, we have 2 people in a serious condition under operation right now.
And condemnations won't help them at this point. Let's pause for a moment. Eli, we'll get to you in just 1 minute, but Julien Balul is in Jerusalem at the location of the Gay Pride Parade. Again, Julien, good evening again. Any updates from there? Statements, more information coming out?
Good evening. Well, we are just at the entrance of the park. The park, it was supposed to be there a party. Of course, there was no party. There was a political event. There was a gathering of sad people, of angry people. This evening, this event just finished, and now some of the people are going back home, but some of them are going to Zion Square because they are calling for a spontaneous demonstration, demonstration of angriness, of course, of sadness in Zion Square in Jerusalem. So we'll see how many people will go to this demonstration, but it's for sure we can say something. This event is not over. This event is not finished. This will continue for the next few days.
Julien, we just heard a bit in the studio that there were some talks during the Pride Parade that people had seen the assailant, this ultra-Orthodox man who had committed a similar crime 10 years ago at the event. When you were there going through the event since the morning, what did the security look like?
The security was very heavy, but it's like this everywhere in Jerusalem because it's a very sensitive city, very sensitive site. But it was a good atmosphere. People were, you know, singing and they were laughing with each other. And the event, at least when it started, it seemed to be okay. It seemed to be good. And suddenly we've seen people running to the place and the police running to the place. It was very, very, very quick. But everybody understood very quick what was happening. And maybe if the police arrived to the site so fast, so maybe it means that they knew that it was around, as you say.
Julien Baloul in Jerusalem, thanks very much again for this. From there, and Ellie, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, no, the only point which I find interesting or infuriating maybe is that the fact that this man have not shown any
remorse.
Exactly,
Right.
he didn't regret his wrongdoings in the course of 10 years. So I think that such a man who is getting out of prison should be monitored in such a way,
Certainly.
especially when this event is taking place yet again in the same location. It's
Honey, we spoke
ironic
about this earlier in the show a little bit with Amir Ohana of the Likud party, but I want to go back to it because his sort of response was that it's about the society, which is very true in many ways. But we do have a government now in Israel that is leaning again more towards the ultra-Orthodox. You have policies, reforms that were passed before that are being rolled back, which is something that the ultra-Orthodox are causing to occur. So can we say that a place like Jerusalem can really become more progressive in any way when you have that kind of a government?
Well,
or is it about the society?
I might use a different word. Instead of progressive, accepting.
Right.
I don't need progress from anybody.
You have to be first accepting before you get to be progressive, right?
But what we see, if I can link this to politics, what we see in Israel, rabbis are extremely important figures, political figures, not just public leaders. And when you have about tens of rabbis that are stating that this should be abolished, that this is an immortal sin, that this is a wrong behavior, and so on and so forth, then the person who holds the knife, and we just see them on the screen, the Lehava organization, Bentzi Gopstein, and so on. These people are racist, fascists, homophobes, everything bad in Israeli society. The problem is that they are extremely visible, and this spills over into the political system. People cannot really differentiate between these words that turn into actions and other people's words. And I think it would have been better if we would have created some sort of an understanding that you cannot say such things on any community in Israel.
Right.
And that includes the Arabs, by the way, and that includes gay people, and that includes...
It's the same issue. I mean, it's not the same, but we see echoes of it, the same kind of discussions that are happening in the United States over the sort of limits of free speech, where what is, racist to a point that you should not allow it, and what is just allowing a democracy to thrive, whether it's hate speech or not.
But the funny thing is that only a few days ago, the ultra-Orthodox, the leader of the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party, Litzman, who is the deputy minister of health, became the king of the secular community, the king of Tel Aviv, the king of progressed thinking, while approving wanting to make some alterations in the cannabis
allowing it to be sold in pharmacies for the most part. And not just
so he really became like a superstar among the secular community, and now to see that, it only emphasizes how big the differences still are between most of Israel and the ultra-Orthodox community.
Let's go from this. I mean, this event today, we have the settler story, which we sat and spoke about earlier in this edition, that has become sort of the story of the week in Israel, with the Bet El settlements, 2 housing construction.
Bet El and Sanur.
Destruction of housing units ordered by the Israeli court, and Netanyahu's approval of hundreds more.
Yeah, well, it was, first of all, eviction, then destruction. And it should be said, there's a direct link between what you said and the gay parade today, because a news reporter from Channel 10 was severely beaten in Beit El because he was considered to be a leftist. So let's put that in different light. The people of Beit El did not want this project to be established in their community.
The demolished project.
Yeah, the Drainov project. The Supreme Court decided that everybody within that project who came from outside Beit El should be evicted. The military did what the Supreme Court said it should do, and then a day later, a demolition order was issued for this project. The thing is that while this happened, one of the members of the Jewish home said that somebody should take a big tractor and just flatten the Supreme Court. Now, but I do not agree with the Supreme Court on everything, but a member of the coalition, let me remind you, the Jewish home, cannot say such a thing on the Israeli Supreme Court. This is a no-no. Other people said, well, he overstepped his balance and so on and so forth. No, he did not. He had time to recant 3 events, and in each and every event, yeah, exactly.
No, and his party members, among them Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, who is number 2 of the hawkish Jewish Home Party, condemned his saying as well. So I think that unity was ironically made over his controversial statement. But as you've been talking about Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is back in his natural trap between the right-wing voters, which many of them he stole in such a way to a certain extent from the Jewish Home Party in the last elections, and the Obama administration, Washington in general, not only Obama. We see an increasing interest of European powers in what's going on, and of course the Palestinian Authority saying very clearly there's no chance for peace if such orders of construction in the settlements will keep on going.
For now, it seems out of those 3 players, seems mainly interested in his coalition and in internal affairs, not so much in international or in the Palestinian conflict.
I think he's binded into the international arena, because if he even looks inside, everything will fall apart. He just saw his Minister of Education standing on a rooftop screaming towards the youngsters over there to basically forcefully try to stop the eviction and the demolition. That's the Minister of Education. I think that what we saw is a catch-22, because this developer, Drainov, is a scam, and he's a sham, and what he did is he binded them into these, and eventually they got the 300 units which they wanted to break the freeze of the no building. And they got the 300 units. These 300
units. An additional 500
exactly.
in
Let's look ahead for a moment then, if we're talking about additional units. We spoke earlier about what would it look like if Israel were to choose to evacuate West Bank settlements, which doesn't seem like a thing that could be imaginable anytime in the near future. But this government, you know, as you were saying earlier, doesn't seem to have a policy not only for the long term, definitely not even for the short term. Can we say already what is its settlement policy going to be now that this new government is formed? Where is it going with this?
No, we can't, because the Prime Minister said freeze of building. Only units that were basically legislated 2 years ago will be built. Just yesterday, he announced 800 units more, well, 500 in East Jerusalem and 300 in the Judea and Samaria. And right now, what they are looking for is an additional 2 settlements to be re-erected in the north of Judea and Samaria. Literally, this government does not know left from right, and I think this recession in the parliament came at a good time, because first, they don't have a budget. They don't have a budget, and he needs to show a budget.
Maybe it's good if there's no budget to build.
Well, if there's
there will be budget to build.
No, budget to build.
The construction budget.
Budget to build.
The money, they will find.
Yes,
they will find.
But the thing is, if by 15th of March he will not come with a budget,
right? Does it look like he? So it doesn't look like he will pass the budget.
Yeah, but they will have to dissolve the parliament, and we'll have elections again. Yay.
Yay! Yeah, really excited about that.
But that's his problem. Right now, he doesn't have a budget. His treasurer minister is doing everything in order to change things that he would like, because he wants to advance some of his policies. The education minister is going against him in forcefully. And there's one minister who we did not see, the interior minister, who is somewhere to the east of us, sitting with the people who cannot be considered as partners for peace talks for the last 2 weeks, and nobody's really talking about it, but something's happening there.
There's a report that came out today also, just as sort of one last word on the settlements, that the Israeli journalist Ehud Ya'ari wrote about, that, you know, again, about how the 2005 disengagement was actually only part of a larger peace plan, that it was going to lead to something.
What, a peace plan?
Now that we had, I mean, this was done, of course, by a right-wing, Ariel Sharon, a right-wing prime minister. Netanyahu, any chance to see him change his tune in any way now that he's been in power for so long?
Exactly. This is a great question. He's very concentrated on maintaining his power, and if it means to go forward with construction orders, he will do that. If it means to make some voices of, heading towards peace, which we've heard only a month or so ago, we heard a few very surprising statements from Netanyahu, very moderate statements, not so right-wing as we used to. So he's adjusting to the current situation, but he's focused on maintaining his power, on stabilizing his very unstable coalition. And now, he has to deal not only with settlement, but with the gas issue, and in which he have a coalition partner, Arya Deri, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardi leader, who is making him a lot of trouble. So he has many issues to take care of just in order to maintain his power.
It's amazing that this conversation is once a week, and there's still so much to talk about. Dr. Hani Zubaydah, thank you very much. There'll be plenty more next week when you come back to fill us in. And let's go back for a moment to Jerusalem, where Julian Baloul is standing by. Julian, good evening again. Any update on the condition of the 6 people stabbed today at the Gay Pride Parade?
Well, from what we know from the Shaare Zedek hospital, the situation is stable, but still one of them is in a very serious condition, and the rest is in a middle condition, as we say in English, as we say in Hebrew, sorry. So we are waiting for, everybody is waiting for updates from the hospital, but we don't know anything else for now.
We understand that the Israeli Minister of Education has actually, since this event happened, offered increased funding for the LGBT community. Does it seem like, it's probably too early to tell, but anything positive might be able to come out of this in terms of policy?
Well, 9 years ago, there was an attack against a gay pub in Tel Aviv. It was the Bar Noir attack, and the Prime Minister came to visit and to be with them, to express his solidarity to the LGBT community. And the President of the State of Israel, Shimon Peres, at this time called for the gay union in Israel, gay civil rights in Israel. But still, even if we've seen more and more rights for the gay community in Israel, we cannot say that after this event the situation totally changed. So we'll see in the next days, in the next few days, what will happen. What is sure for now, that the event is not over, and it is not yet over at least, and we'll see in the next few days what will happen. But yeah, it may be right. It may be right that there will be a change. I don't think so, because they were attacked in the past and it didn't change the situation.
Julian Baloul in Jerusalem this evening. Thanks very much for all of these updates. We'll of course continue to update us, to update you, our news desk, throughout the night. Eli Ochenberg, thanks very much for being with me this evening. And that's it for us for tonight. We'll send you to our news desk. That's it for us. Have a great night from the Jaffa Port. Join us back here on Sunday for another edition of the News Today.